Several countries in the world were recovering from the Halloween buzz, but somewhere in Sao Paulo, in the early hours of the 1st of November 2002, 18-year-old Suzanne and her 15-year-old brother Andreas came home to find their house in disarray. It appeared their home had been burgled. They both had allegedly spent the night out, and their parents were the only ones home the night before. They alerted the police, and the officers responded within minutes. With the officers by their side, they rushed to their parents' bedroom to check up on them and were met with a gory sight. The bedroom walls were covered in blood. Their heads were wrapped in towels and plastic. Mr. and Mrs. Richthofen were found lifeless in a pool of blood. It would take only a week, but Suzanne and her accomplices confessed to the murders. What happened between the 31st of October and the 1st of November 2002 in the Von Richthofen residence? Was it truly a robbery gone bad? Why would Suzanne murder her parents? A lot of people wondered why this rich girl would get rid of her providing parents. Was it for the money? Who were her accomplices? And what was in it for them? Named after the apostle St. Paul of Tarsus, the 470-year-old city of Sao Paulo is the largest city in Brazil, with a population of over 12 million as reported in a 2020 census. The city is the 20th largest city and the largest Portuguese-speaking city in the world. Additionally, Sao Paulo is Latin America's melting pot city, as it's home to Arab, Italian, and Japanese diasporas, with several neighborhoods catering to specific ethnicities. Since Brazil's coffee exportation gained magnitude in the late 19th century, Sao Paulo has become a major economic center. In addition to her booming economy, Sao Paulo has also taken a stand in entertainment, culture, architecture, and arts. Brazil has the 18th highest crime rate in the world, and Sao Paulo, being one of her urban cities, isn't free from this statistic. While Sao Paulo is more popular for the higher armed robbery rate in the country, more violent crimes are not mythical. The city, however, gained a new reputation when the rich Baroness Suzane Von Richthofen killed her parents in 2002. Suzanne Louise von Richthofen, born in Sao Paulo, Brazil on the 3rd of November 1983, to her German father, Manfred Albert von, and her Lebanese-Brazilian mother, Maricia von Richthofen. Suzanne's father, Manfred, was an engineer by profession. He was the director of Dursa, a state-owned company that manages Sao Paulo's highway system, and until his death, functioned as the chief engineer for the Mario Covas Beltway project. His wife, and Suzanne's mother Maricia, was a psychiatrist. In 1987, the Von Richthofen family gained a new member when Suzanne's younger brother Andreas was born. Suzanne's family seemed like an admirable family, happy and well-to-do. As a family, they were not the biggest social butterflies. Manfred and Suzanne were quite reserved, and Andreas took after his mother Maricia by being more outgoing. The children had access to the best education money could buy, and they didn't put it to waste. They were both good students. The parents were very involved in their education and were well known by their school. There were even speculations of the family being related to the noble Richthofen family in Germany. It was said that Manfred claimed to be the grandnephew of Baron von Richthofen, a famous fighter pilot who got shot in 1918. The pilot is so known as the Red Baron and is one of the many notable members of the Richthofen family. Suzanne was known to have a good relationship with her parents and her brother. She was the embodiment of the perfect female lead, rich blonde and multilingual. Suzanne spoke Portuguese, English, Spanish, French, and German fluently. She even held a brown belt in karate. She was quite the overachiever, even though she was not loud about it. Schoolmates described her as happy but a little shy. Her teachers called her gifted. Suzanne's friends adored her. They found Suzanne's love for stuffed animals and soft toys amusing. They couldn't help but admire how much she willingly spent on them. After graduating from Collegiate Humboldt High School, Suzanne began studying for her law degree at Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo. Andrea von Richthofen was learning to fly model airplanes and was being instructed by a certain 18-year-old named Daniel Cravinhos de Paula e Silva. This was how 16-year-old Suzanne met Daniel, and soon their steamy romance began. Expecting her parents' disapproval, Suzanne tried to hide her relationship for as long as she could. As the months went by, her parents found out about their relationship and didn't object, thinking it was a passing fling. The Von Richthofens thought Daniel was a working student from a humble background. He built and sold model airplanes and auto parts to make money while pursuing a degree. But as time went by, it seemed the young man was no good for their precious daughter. Suzanne's parents approved of her relationship with Daniel until they got to know him even better. It was now 2002, and it turns out that within the 3 years Daniel had been dating Suzanne, the now 21-year-old man neither studied nor worked. He had lied to them. Daniel truly was from a low-class family and did not seem to have any desirable prospects. Suzanne's parents also couldn't come to terms with Daniel's marijuana and massive drug intake. They also began to suspect that Suzanne had also begun taking drugs. Daniel was a bad influence on Suzanne, they concluded. Suzanne spent most of her time with Daniel. She even skipped her high school graduation to spend time with her boyfriend. Even when she got into the university, they stuck together. Daniel had even attended Suzanne's law school class excursion to the Legislative Assembly with her. In Daniel's bedroom at his parents' house, pictures of Suzanne took over his walls. One of his pillows even had her picture imprinted. His bed contained dozens of soft toys that are believed to be all gifts from Suzanne. Although Manfred and Maricia von Richthofen were interested in their children's success, friends believed they were too busy to pay attention to the children's personal life. Suzanne was always in charge of Andreas and would make him tag along to her visits to the Cravinhos home. Daniel had an older brother named Christian, and the four of them would spend time playing online video games at the local internet cafe. The Von Richthofen were not comfortable with their children hanging around Daniel and Christian. Their worries were justified. The Cravinhos brothers were raised in a rough neighborhood and were known to be troublemakers in the said neighborhood. In addition, Christian had been in rehab for his cocaine addiction. They were known as destructive, and it was said that their parents never did anything to correct behavior. Elderly neighbors began moving away from the Cravinhos home because of the disturbance. This behavior and reputation did not befit the Von Richthofen name, and her parents wanted someone better. Towards the end of 2002, Suzanne began spending nights at Daniel's. She told her parents that she would be sleeping over at a friend's place, and this went on for a while. All her friends knew the plan and would always cover for her. In April of 2002, Suzanne went on one of her sleepovers, and the usual plan went south. Suzanne claimed she would be sleeping over at her best friend's, and that night, her mother Maricia called to check in. Suzanne's best friend couldn't keep up with the plan, and Suzanne's little game was exposed. When Suzanne returned home the next morning, her mother confronted. Suzanne confessed to spending nights with Daniel at a motel. After all the persuasion and refusal to end the relationship, they tried to find a middle ground. Manfred suggested that Daniel goes back to school and picks up one language, English. That way, he could step a little closer to Suzanne's level, and they would approve of their relationship. Daniel was not interested. In July of 2002, Manfred and Maricia went on vacation to Europe, and Daniel moved into the Von Richthofen state for the whole month. Suzanne's parents were away. Suzanne enjoyed the 1-month arrangement and wanted to extend it to eternity. When her parents returned, Suzanne wanted to keep living with her boyfriend and asked her father to give them an apartment, to which he refused. If Suzanne wanted to keep seeing the man they didn't approve of, she couldn't do it with their money. He mentioned that Suzanne and Daniel were free to do as they pleased, as long as Suzanne completed her education and got a job. This was not the first request Suzanne would make on behalf of her boyfriend. Her parents had lent Daniel money on several occasions, and have even gotten him clothes and gifts, on Suzanne's request of course. Soon, Manfred and Maricia von Richthofen put their foot down and asked their daughter to break off her relationship with Daniel. She refused. Like every parent, They threatened to cut off her allowance. This did not deter Suzanne, but one day, she learned her father was trying to break off her relationship by sending her to Europe to complete her education. Suzanne did not want to leave, so she lied to her parents about fulfilling their wish. She had finally broken it off with Daniel. Mauricia was reportedly overjoyed as she told all her friends that Suzanne had finally gotten rid of Daniel. Suzanne was, however, seeing Daniel secretly. Manfred never believed Suzanne, and his doubts were confirmed on Saturday the 26th of October, 2002. On the other hand, secretly dating wasn't enough for the Loverbirds. They couldn't keep tiptoeing around her parents. They had to be completely taken out of the picture. That's when they began to plot the murders of her parents. The morning of Wednesday, the 31st of October 2002, Suzanne went about her day per usual. She went to school. The plan included weapons, so Daniel spent the day filling iron bars with wood to make them heavier and more effective. When night came, the plan was set in motion. But first, Andreas had to be taken out of the way. Suzanne drove to pick up Daniel around 9:30 p.m. Before leaving, they went over their plan as they relaxed over a cocktail of marijuana, paint thinner, and glue. Afterwards, they drove to the Von Richthofen home to help Andrea sneak out around 11 p.m. The 15-year-old thought his sister and her boyfriend, being cool adults, were doing him a favor, so he could see his friends and play some online games. Christian was always at the cafe from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. Before Andreas got to the cafe, Christian had already left to wait for his partners. Suzanne picked up Christian, and off to her house they went. The trio got to the house before midnight. The Von Richthofen residence was in Campo Belo, which was Portuguese for beautiful field. The family home was constructed with a 100 square meter property, sporting a large garden and a swimming pool. The house gate was electric, so Suzanne used her remote control to quietly let them in and parked her Volkswagen Golf in the garage. 21-year-old David and his 26-year-old brother Christian quickly got dressed in dark clothing. Suzanne handed them surgical gloves to conceal their fingerprints and pantyhose to protect their hair. They couldn't leave any evidence behind at the soon-to-be crime scene. Suzanne went into the house first, and the first order of business was the home security system. She quickly punched in the codes and disconnected the alarm system and turned off the security cameras to the family estate. Afterwards, she went to check if her parents were asleep, which they were. While Suzanne did her part of the plan, the Cravinos brothers remained outside. She signaled them in and let them into her home. Suzanne remained in the living room, while Daniel and Christian went up to her parents' bedroom around 12:15 a.m. with the iron bars they had brought along with them. David stood over a sleeping Manfred, and Christian positioned himself on Mauricia's side. The plan was to bludgeon them to death with the bars, but it proved a little more difficult than it seemed in the planning phase. The couple did not pass away immediately, but both suffered severe brain damage. Severe brain damage coupled with injuries like theirs caused the tongue to lose support at the base and drop to the back of the throat and obstruct the airway. This creates a loud and disturbing snore-like noise. When the noise began, Daniel rushed to the bathroom with wet towels and attempted to block the noise and suffocate them to death. It didn't work. He then ran down to the kitchen to get a pitcher of water. The plan was to drown out the noise. It worked for Manfred, but not Mauricia. So instead, they tied her head with a plastic bag until she stopped breathing. The autopsy report showed that Mauricia had severe defensive wounds. In fact, 3 of her fingers were broken, which showed that she tried to fight off her attacker. After the deed was done, Suzanne went up to confirm her parents' death. Once she verified her parents were dead, she began looting her own home. The Cravinos brothers did the same. It was the initial plan. Suzanne worked downstairs, while the brothers worked on the upper floor. Their aim was to ensure the house looked like it had been burglarized. Maybe it was the rush of adrenaline. Maybe it was the fear of getting caught. Maybe it was lack of expertise. but their burglary gave the police their first clue. The trio did not make anything a random burglar would. All they made away with was a stash of cash in both US dollars and euros. The house had its valuables, cell phones, computers, cars, and even a prized firearm intact. A burglar would have stripped a house like that to the bones. They spread papers in the library, made a mess in the house. Daniel planted Manfred's .38 revolver he found in the now late man's drawer, on his side of the bed. Once satisfied with their work, they left in Suzanne's car to create their alibi. On their way, they threw out a garbage bag that contained the clothes, iron bars, surgical gloves, and pantyhose Daniel and Christian had used during the attack. They dropped Christian off at a McDonald's near the apartment where he lived with his grandmother. He spent a couple of hours in the fast food restaurant as they had planned. Suzanne and Daniel checked into Motel Colonial's luxurious presidential suite. They spent their time eating, smoking, and swimming. Suzanne and Daniel checked out of the hotel around 3 in the morning. The couple then went to the cybercafe Andreas had spent the night with his friends to pick him up. Around 4 a.m., the Von Richthofen siblings returned home. Their front door was wide open. It was Sao Paulo. Crimes occur even behind bolted doors. It was obvious something had happened in their absence. Daniel quickly called the police. This was around 4 a.m. When the authorities arrived, they all entered the house together. They rushed up to their parents' bedroom, only to meet them bloodied and unrecognizable. A revolver laid on the floor on Manfred's side, but was just out of his reach. The police inspected and reported that no shot was fired. From the onset, the police had reasons to believe that was a staged and strange inside job. Not only were the most important properties still in the house, there were no signs of forced entry. They also discovered the sabotaged alarm system and security cameras. Whoever broke in knew the security codes. The mess made in the house and the library especially didn't seem very authentic. It looked like the burglar was trying to intentionally create the scene, and the obvious pattern of the mess was easily cited. In the course of the investigation, the police found out about a family maid who had been recently fired. She was reportedly so bitter about losing her job that she threatened the Von Richthofen family. She was the first person to be interrogated, and her involvement in the crime was soon dismissed. The police soon noticed that Suzanne was taking her parents' death quite differently from her brother. Andreas could not bring himself to accept reality, and his grief was obvious. His older sister, on the other hand, seemed to be having a blast around Sao Paulo with her boyfriend. Was it a coping mechanism, or was something really fishy? The very next day after her parents' bodies were discovered, Suzanne was frolicking in the family home swimming pool with Daniel. Although friends and family reported that Suzanne was visibly heartbroken at the burial. Hours after the burial, it was Suzanne's 19th birthday, and to the detectives' dismay, Suzanne threw a birthday party in the same home her parents were murdered 3 days prior. A couple of her friends were present, and if you had been out of Sao Paulo, you would never have guessed the birthday girl was just recently orphaned. The police decided to keep a close eye on Suzanne. About a week after her parents were murdered, Suzanne was inquiring about the possibility of selling the house. In fact, the police discovered Suzanne and Daniel had plans on starting a business with the inheritance left behind by her parents. Suzanne seemed to care more about the money than her parents' case, but this was not illegal. She could not be arrested on this basis. But the police already had their suspicions about Suzanne and her boyfriend Daniel. They also placed Christian on their radar when they found out that the trio spent a lot of time together. They learned that Christian had bought a really expensive motorcycle on the 1st of November, about 10 hours after the murder. He bought a $3,600 Suzuki, 1,100 horsepower, and paid $3,600 bills. Proud of his new ride and confident that he couldn't get caught, Christian didn't even bother to hide the motorcycle. A team of investigators went by Christian's house and saw the motorcycle. It didn't take long for word to reach Suzanne about Christian's reckless purchase. It led to a huge argument between Suzanne and Daniel, and finally, Suzanne decided to break off her relationship with the love of her life. On the 7th of November 2002, Christian was invited to the police station. Some police officers showed up at his door requesting his help to identify a suspect. He agreed to go with them, but Christian Krevinos never went back home. He was interrogated for 6 hours and stopped making sense moments into the interview. He contradicted himself so many times, he did not even understand what he was saying anymore. When questioned about the bike, he has 3 story versions on how he purchased it, before he finally settled on admitting that he got it with his own money. Christian's father, Astro Gilder Krevinos, was present during the interrogation, and at this point, he stormed out of the room. He was overwhelmed as he realized his son was guilty. Suzanne got interviewed in her house while her brother slept. She initially refused all of the allegations, but one of the officers stated that as soon as they threatened to bring Andreas into it, she spilled everything. By the 9th of October 2002, Suzane Von Richthofen, David Krevinos, and Christian Krevinos were all in police custody for double homicide. Andreas was in shambles. He has lost everyone. Both his parents were dead, and his sister was going to jail. Daniel and Christian, the 2 people who had become like his older brothers, were also going away for a long time. This all happened to a 15-year-old in less than 2 weeks. Regardless of what his older sister might have done, Andreas reportedly promised to stay by her side. He could not bear to lose another person forever. The Brazilian law went a step further with the innocent until proven guilty clause. If an accused individual isn't caught red-handed, the law could exempt such a person from being locked up until the trial. The accused would be placed under house arrest until their case trial begins. This worked in Suzanne's favor, and she was soon released from police custody. The day before Suzanne returned home, the house walls had been vandalized to pass a public message to her. The word bitch and other expressions had been spray painted on the walls. Suzanne's trial began in 2006, and within those 4 years, the heiress was free and busy. She launched a lawsuit to take over her parents' estate. At the time, it was valued to be over $5 million. Reports stated that a revolver was found in one of Suzanne's teddy bears, and investigators found it to be a risk to her brother Andreas's life. If the firearm had not been found, Suzanne could have actually won the lawsuit. The murder of Manfred and Mauricia von Richthofen was a hot topic in Brazil for a long time. The public was divided on who to hold accountable for the heinous. Why would a girl with so much presently and a lot more ahead of her commit such a crime? It was easier to blame the illiterate, drug-addicted, unemployed troublemakers that are the Krevinos brothers. They already had a reputation. Suzanne had to have been under Daniel's spell. She was a naive rich girl who just wanted to please the man she loved. A news article tried to use the banality of evil theory by German-American philosopher Hannah Arendt to dissect Suzanne's actions. In summary, the article implied that Suzanne was not evil, but participated in evil through thoughtlessness and obedience to a higher authority, which led to the murder of her parents. There was a disconnect between the plan and the deed, the article concluded. Another side of the public believed it was all Suzanne's doing, that she was the mastermind behind it all. It was generic to blame the poor, but in this case, Suzanne was an entitled spoiled brat who pushed her boyfriend and his brother into murdering her parents. Suzanne's lawyer Dinevelde Barney, who was said to be a friend of Manfred von Richthofen, built up Suzanne's image as the little girl who was led astray by an older boyfriend. Andreas would later speak up about the lawyer. He said he had never seen or met him until his sister got apprehended. He described the relationship between Suzanne and her lawyer as strange. Barney claimed Suzanne didn't have an ill motive. Her only crime was adoring Daniel. In April of 2006, he arranged a television interview to broadcast Suzanne's side of the story. Suzanne was now 23 years old, but she looked like a little girl during the interview. She wore a pink Minnie Mouse t-shirt, and her blonde hair was adorned with colorful clips. During the interview, she clarified that the trio had indeed made the plans together. In her own words, it was a competition of ideas. She mentioned that Christian must have been the most clueless one in the group, but the same couldn't be said for Daniel and her. She regrets her action, but it was now a part of her life. It was her story, she said. Throughout the interview, she clung to her lawyer as she cried and accused Daniel for taking her most precious family away from her. She also claimed that he made her do drugs with him all the time. The interview continued the next day, and this was how Suzanne lost the sympathy she had been building. The news crew was setting up, and had already pinned on the microphone to them, but Suzanne and her lawyer didn't know it had been turned on. The lawyer could be heard coaching Suzanne on what to say, how to say it, and the emotions to display. Barney was recorded clearly saying, "Start to cry and say you don't want to talk anymore."
Acabou, mais nada. Começa a chorar e fala, não quero falar mais.
This ruined Suzanne's credibility, and all her defense team's attempt to salvage the situation was futile. The Von Richthofen's net worth was estimated to be over $5 million. However, suspicions and doubts began to arise when the corruption that occurred at Dursa, the company Manfred worked, came to light. Authorities found 2 Swiss bank accounts that were opened by Manfred in November 2001. These accounts were just in time for Suzanne's 18th birthday and were opened in her name. Their joint value was estimated to be at least 10 million euros. The public prosecutor's office received documents from an anonymous source that trailed transactions from an engineering company in Sao Paulo. This engineering company was called MAVR Engenharia, registered by Manfred Albert von Richthofen. The registered address of the company was next door to the von Richthofen residence in Campobello. The documents showed cash deposits into 2 Swiss bank accounts, but the investigation couldn't continue due to insufficient evidence. Regardless, these rumors worsened Suzanne's already bad reputation in the media. A lot of her supporters had now switched sides, saying she was indeed the mastermind. They believed she had her parents murdered so she could get her hands in their hard-earned money. The trial was scheduled for the 5th of June 2006. Suzanne, Daniel, and Christian were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The process actually began on the 17th of July of 2006, and the courtroom was packed with 200 people who came to witness the long-anticipated trial. Suzanne and Daniel had now been broken up for almost 4 years, and she was heavily blaming Daniel for the crime, while the latter and his brother maintained that Suzanne had put the whole thing together. The Cravinos brothers were crying through most of the court sessions. Suzanne, on the other hand, was calm and collected, although she was caught laughing on one occasion, which caused an uproar in court. When Daniel took the stand, he claimed he had committed the murder alone. His brother didn't kill anyone. In his testimony, he mentioned that Suzanne began talking about killing her parents about a year into their relationship. He claimed that Manfred abused Suzanne, and Andreas knew of it. He said that Andreas would always stay in his older sister's room to prevent their father from going to her. He also recounted what he witnessed at one of the family's barbecues. Suzanne had asked for an ice cream, and her mother threw an object at her head in response. Daniel went on to tell the court that Manfred and Mauricia were alcoholics who hit their children whenever they were drunk. He also added that the late couple had extramarital affairs. He went further to say that Suzanne smoked weed and did heavier drugs too. Daniel claimed that his drug use began during their relationship. According to Daniel, whenever Suzanne was high, all she could talk about was killing her parents. One time, she had suggested burning the home down while her parents slept. On another occasion, she talked about cutting off the brakes to their cars. She finally persuaded him and his brother to beat them to death. She let them into the house that night. By the time they got up to the bedroom, Suzanne ran down the stairs and left them to it. He recounted that after he was finally able to finish off Manfred, Mauricia turned. Christian froze, so he had to rush over to Mauricia's side of the bed and finish the job. He also stated that he covered their faces so Andreas would not have to see them disfigured. Days after the deed had been done, he and Suzanne had gotten into an argument. She called him and his brother immature and irresponsible, and that she shouldn't have trusted them to kill her parents. Their 3-year relationship ended during this argument. When Andreas took the stand, he publicly denied the abuse allegations. In addition, There was no trace of alcohol found in Manfred's or Mauricia's system, according to the autopsy reports. Also, there was no evidence of the alleged affairs. Regardless of these holes in Daniel's testimony, the jury had a lot to think about, especially with Daniel confessing to killing both Manfred and Mauricia. Everyone who attended the trial or kept up with it on the news were waiting for one thing: Suzanne's testimony. Only when Suzanne took the stand did she show any emotion. She even gave a teary account of everything that transpired on the 31st of October 2002 and even prior. According to Suzanne, it was Daniel's idea to kill her parents. She claimed that Daniel tried to ruin the perfect image she had of her father. She tried her best to remain close with her parents as well as with Daniel, but her boyfriend made her understand that was not an option. She would have to choose. It's either him or them. After she let them in, she told them they could go up, and she remained on the couch with her ears plugged. She did not want her parents to die, but there was nothing she could do at that point. It was too late. Christian and Daniel's mother, Nadia Gravinos, spoke to the press concerning the need for a just sentence. While it might hurt her, Nadia maintained that justice was necessary and prayed the judgment was measured according to the guilt of each party. Prosecutor Roberto Tardelli, in his closing remark, described Suzanne as a selfish girl who wanted her independence and her parents' assets without working for it. Daniel and Suzanne killed her parents without mercy. Christian joined forces with them foolishly, all for money. On the 22nd of July 2006, a jury of 7 members found the trio guilty and came to a verdict. The prosecution had suggested a 50-year sentence to each of the accused, but in the final verdict, Suzanne and Daniel were sentenced to 40 years in prison, and Christian received a sentence of 39 years. Suzanne became quite infamous in prison. To protect her from other inmates, she was placed in solitary confinement for about 7 months. In the early years of her incarceration, Andreas came by to visit his sister. No other family member did. They made it clear that they do not want to see her. After spending 3 years in jail, Suzanne appealed in 2009 to change the remainder of her sentence to house arrest. Her request was denied. She tried again in 2011, and her appeal was denied yet again. In the same year, Andreas sued his sister for her half of the inheritance. This included their parents' insurance. Andreas won and received Manfred's life insurance of $300,000. Christian and Daniel, on the other hand, were sent to the same prison but were kept in different units. Reports say that Daniel remained in love with Suzanne. He made murals in his jail cell of his family and Suzanne. He was constantly asking about her and was even heard saying he would love her till eternity. Suzanne got in a relationship with an inmate named Sandra Gomez, and by September 2014, they were basically married. Before the couple even started dating, they were privileged to be sharing a cell. Soon, they wanted to move to the couple's prison section so they could sleep together. This required them to sign a document of affectionate relationship recognition. In the Trembebe prison where they were locked up, this document is equivalent to a marriage certificate. When the news of Suzanne's relationship got out, everyone found it disturbing because of who Suzanne's wife was. Sandra Gomez was also known as Sandra Bleed. She had been sentenced to 27 years for the kidnap and murder of her 14-year-old neighbor. Suzanne was later transferred to another prison, and this ended her marriage. Suzanne decided to focus on herself and decided to continue her education. In Brazil, an inmate who has served 1/6 of their sentence and has a good behavior record is granted a semi-aberto. Semi-aberto is Portuguese for half open. This program grants the prisoner more freedom within the prison. This opportunity also comes with 6 temporary exits from the prisons. These exits are granted on special occasions like Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, and New Year. Coincidentally, the trio were all granted the semi-aberto. Suzanne was allowed to leave the prison premise on Mother's Day, and this caused a public outrage. Reporters were on the lookout for her. A television crew even went to Mauricia's grave, but they couldn't find Suzanne. They don't think she even went by because there were no flowers on the grave. On one of Christian's temporary exits, he hooked up with an old girlfriend and she fell pregnant. He was very excited about turning his life around and starting a family. Love seemed to be in the Gravinos neighborhood. Daniel met his cellmate's sister, a young scientist Elaine, on his Mother's Day exit. They spent the day together. Daniel got another exit in August for Father's Day. He spent it with Aline, but brought along a marriage proposal, and by Christmas, the two were married. In 2016, Suzanne reportedly began seeing a 37-year-old divorcee called Rodrigo Olberg. Since this relationship began, Suzanne's semi-aberto was revoked. She had stopped complying with the prison's disciplinary requirements. In January of 2018, Daniel Cravinos was released from prison after only serving 15 out of his 40-year sentence. He is said to be rebuilding his life and focusing on his new family. Christian Cravinos was released from prison in August of 2017 with only 14 years served. Christian only enjoyed 7 months and 24 days of freedom before he made his way back to prison. At the age of 44, Christian was accused of assaulting his girlfriend and attempting to bribe a police officer to cover up his crime. In 2018, Suzanne's lawyers requested that she serve the remainder of her sentence in prison. It is speculated that her defense made this request because of public pressure and concerns for her safety. 15 years had passed, but Sao Paulo had not forgotten about the teenager who had her parents killed. A news station had conducted a random street interview asking questions about Suzane Von Richthofen. Everyone still remembered who she was, and several tagged her crime as unforgivable. After Suzanne's arrest, Andreas moved in with his maternal grandmother Lourdes Abdullah and his uncle Miguel Abdullah. They tried to raise Andreas with the same life he has always known. The family never spoke of that horrible night, nor the morning after. While his sister was under house arrest, Andreas wrote a letter to a local newspaper. He spoke of how he still loved and has already forgiven his sister. He went on to talk about how he knew their parents had forgiven Suzanne as well. The media crucified his letter. Once the backlash died down, he went back to his studies. He was able to complete his doctorate degree in chemistry at his parents' alma mater, University of Sao Paulo. He indeed lost his parents and only sibling, but his friends and family tried to fill the void as much as they could. Andreas was going to inherit half of his parents, and people began to worry for his safety. Prosecutor Tardelli warned that Suzanne could strike again and suggested that Andreas make a public statement and prepare a will that excludes Suzanne. He also advised that Andreas leave Brazil for good, just to be safe. Andreas then wrote another letter to a local newspaper. Andreas' former empathy for his older sister seems to have melted off. He instead empathized with the public's anger towards the three murderers. He wrote that what he felt towards them was disgust. He also used the medium to address the rumors about his father's alleged corruption in the Swiss accounts. He asked that if those accounts truly exist, evidence should be brought forth because he is just as curious to know. He then pleaded that if the allegations were just malicious rumors, it should be retracted and silenced. His parents were not here to defend themselves. They had been killed heinously. The least the public could do is refrain from tainting their reputation. The last time Andreas saw his sister was in 2006 when she got sentenced. This letter and Andreas suing his sister in 2011 was widely commended by the public. He was finally being a man, they thought. He had gotten his inheritance, completed his studies like his parents would have wanted, but Andreas' story did not seem to go in the direction everyone thought it would. Reports say that Andreas got hooked on drugs. There is footage of him being chased by the police while obviously under the influence after trying to break into a house in the south zone of Sao Paulo. His uncle, Miguel Abdullah, came out after this incident to claim Andreas' action was a result of emotional distress. Andreas was then checked into a psychiatric hospital where he is receiving care. Suzanne had apologized to her little brother in interviews. She wondered how much he was suffering carrying the last name that was now only known for murder. She sympathized with the fact that he would have to carry it forever. Many cannot help but think Andreas' life might have gone in a different direction if the Von Richthofen tragedy never happened. Reportedly, an employee who works at the cemetery where Manfred and Mauricia are buried claims to have never seen anyone visit the couple's graveyard. A lot of time has passed, but Suzanne's story still seems to have the same impact. Her case has inspired 2 films, each one exploring a different motive. One claims she was a cold-blooded femme fatale who cajoled 2 men into killing her parents, and it was all to inherit the family fortune. The other portrayed her as a helpless young girl, desperate for love, whose boyfriend pressured into being an accomplice in her parents' murder. In 2021, 2 schoolgirls were arrested for murder. The 12-year-old and 13-year-old girls had killed one of their fathers, Naifu Louise Verling. The 46-year-old police officer has been found in his house with stab wounds to his neck. The pair were arrested in Santa Catarina and were reported to show no remorse. Instead, they asked if they would become as popular as Suzane Von Richthofen. In other news, Suzanne's face is also being photoshopped to Orange is the New Black posters. She seems to have inspired a category of memes. Suzanne's lawyer Dinivelda Barney remains by her side and has ensured she would be eligible for her money after serving her sentence. If the Swiss accounts do exist, being in her name, nothing prevents her from gaining access to the money. While all these go on in the outside world, middle-aged Suzane Von Richthofen remained locked up in a semi-open prison, working in a uniform factory making prison uniforms. She was expected to be released between 2032 and 2042. It was quite surprising to most when Suzanne was released on probation on the 11th of January 2023. In February, she made headlines again as she announced the opening of her online store on social media. Suzanne is currently in a relationship with Felipe Muniz, a divorced local doctor and father of 3, whom she met via Instagram. In May of 2023, Suzanne became pregnant with her first child. In December 2023, Suzanne changed her legal name to Suzanne Louise Magnani Muniz. She chose Magnani from her maternal grandmother, Lourdes Magnani Silva Abdullah, while Muniz was from her partner. The two made their union official at a registry in Andatuba. On the 26th of January 2024, she had her child in Sieben Hospital. She named her son Felipe after his father, her new husband. In a recent interview, Andreas mentioned that he has been trying to reach Suzanne for about 4 years. The 39-year-old man claimed to have unfinished business with his sister. Many believe he is trying to receive a portion of the infamous Swiss accounts. Even though Andreas had inherited the Von Richthofen entire estate, he currently faces 24 lawsuits on urban land tax and late condominium fees. In the same interview, a letter Daniel Crevinos had written to Andreas was handed to the latter. Daniel apologized for his mistake 2 decades ago, but Andreas made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with him. Christian Crevinos suffered a kidney crisis in May 2023, but he is currently serving an open sentence at P2 Tremembe. What are your thoughts on the Von Richthofen case? Would you say justice was truly served? Do you think Suzanne's parents could have done anything differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If there is a case you would like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comment section below. For more captivating true crime stories, like, share, and subscribe to our channel.